January 1st, 1945. The first dawn of the new year breaks cold and metallic over Belgium's frozen plains. At Y-34 airfield, near Metz, frost clings to the wings of a dozen Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, hulking silhouettes against the mist. Ground crews of the 365th Fighter Group, known as the Hell Hawks, shuffle between aircraft with steaming mugs of coffee, their breath fogging in the air as distant artillery rumbles from the Ardennes. To the west, a light hum grows louder, distant, rhythmic, and out of place. Private First Class Eddie Morales, crouched beside a fuel truck, squints at the horizon. "That's not ours," he mutters. At first, no one believes him. The sky has belonged to the Allies for months. German fighters haven't dared a broad daylight raid since the summer of 1944. But within seconds, the hum becomes a roar. Black crosses flash in the morning haze. Messerschmitts, incoming. The warning comes too late. A wave of Focke-Wulf 190 seconds and Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds bursts through the low cloud layer, cannon fire shredding tents, trucks, and aircraft lined neatly on the tarmac. Pilots sprint from mess halls still in flight jackets, ducking behind snow-covered revetments as 20mm shells tear through metal and flesh. The Luftwaffe has unleashed Operation Bodenplatte, its last, desperate gamble to destroy the Allied air forces on the ground. The attack is chaos made physical. Thunderbolts, the same aircraft that once ruled the skies, sit helpless engines cold, ammunition belts half-loaded. Mechanics dive for cover as explosions ripple across the field. A P-47 ignites like a torch, its fuel tanks erupting in a column of orange flame. Captain George Brooking, the 365th's operations officer, drags a dazed pilot away from a burning cockpit as machine gun tracers rake the runway. "Get those ammo dumps sealed off, now!" he shouts, voice swallowed by the roar of strafing aircraft. In minutes, the pristine airfield becomes an inferno. One by one, the Thunderbolts die in their parking bays, massive radial engines coughing smoke, aluminum skins curling under heat. The Luftwaffe pilots, veterans of the Eastern Front, scream down in tight formation, cannons blazing. For once, the tables have turned. From the cockpit of a Focke-Wulf 190 amperes 9, Oberleutnant Hans Keller can see the carnage below. He's been ordered to hit Y-34 specifically. Intelligence marked it as a priority target, home to the 9th Air Force's most effective fighter-bomber group. He lines up his gun sight on a row of parked Thunderbolts. "Ziele fast," he mutters. "Target acquired." The cannons thump, sending a stream of armor-piercing shells into the nearest aircraft. The P-47 explodes, scattering debris across the field. Keller pulls up through the smoke, heart pounding. For the first time in months, he feels something close to triumph. Behind him, though, his wingman shouts into the radio, panic cracking his voice. "Fuel empty. We must turn back." It's the Luftwaffe's hidden curse. Success without sustainability. Each German fighter that dives today carries just enough fuel for one run. There will be no second chance. Still, for those brief, terrible minutes, it works. When the last German plane banks south toward the Rhine, 22 Thunderbolts lie in ruins, along with trucks, fuel stores, and hangars. 4 American pilots are dead, a dozen wounded. The airfield smolders under a grey morning sky. Captain Brooking surveys the wreckage in silence. He knows the Luftwaffe's blow has landed, but he also knows something the Germans do not. The US Army Air Forces do not stay down for long. Hours later, the survivors move through the wreckage. Fuel lines hiss. Blackened wings still radiate heat. The air smells of rubber and gunpowder. Mechanics in soot streaked coveralls pick through twisted fuselages, salvaging what they can. Machine guns, radio sets, even landing gear still intact. By noon, Brooking gathers his men by the command tent, half collapsed and still smoking from a near miss. He speaks plainly, without theatrics. "Gentlemen, we've lost 2 squadrons worth of birds. Command wants us operational by the day after tomorrow." A murmur ripples through the group. Someone laughs in disbelief. 2 days? It sounds impossible. But to Brooking, it isn't. 50 miles away, At Liege Supply Depot, a phone rings in the operations office. Y-34 reports total airfield destruction, requesting immediate resupply, 40 Thunderbolts, full loadout. The sergeant on duty nods, scribbling on a requisition pad already covered in numbers. We'll have replacements by sunrise, he says calmly, as if ordering sandwiches. The American war machine is already in motion. Hundreds of trucks grown to life, hauling crates of tools, spare parts, ammunition, and fuel drums. Train cars stacked with aircraft fuselages and wings begin rolling west from Antwerp, each labeled with chalk scrawls, P-47D, divided by Assembly Line B. The U.S. Army Air Force's logistical network, perfected over 2 years of relentless expansion, stretches from the docks of New York to the muddy roads of Belgium, and it works like clockwork. At Evansville, Indiana, the Republic Aviation Plant is still running around the clock, producing one Thunderbolt every 60 minutes. On New Year's Day 1945, while Europe burns, another P-47 rolls off the assembly line, its skin gleaming under factory lights. Meanwhile, captured Luftwaffe pilots are being escorted through the ruins of Y-34. Among them is Lieutenant Friedrich Hauser, a 2-3-year-old from Stuttgart who flew a Messerschmitt 109 during the raid. His flight had been ambushed by American anti-aircraft fire on the way out, his aircraft forced down in a snowy field. Now, coatless and shivering, he watches as American ground crews swarm across the wrecked airfield. Hauser turns to his guard, a young GI from Kansas no older than himself. "So," he says with a faint smirk, "that's 40 planes gone. How long before you get more?" The GI doesn't answer. He just gestures toward the trucks now rumbling up the access road, each carrying sections of freshly painted wings wrapped in canvas. Hauser frowns. He assumes they're for another base. But as night falls, the floodlights ignite and cranes swing into motion. Mechanics unload entire fuselages from the convoys, brand new P-47D models, their serial numbers still wet with paint. By midnight, assembly crews are already bolting on wings, testing hydraulics, and refueling from fresh 55-gallon drums rolled straight off the trucks. Hauser stares, disbelief freezing his breath. They're rebuilding?" he whispers. No one answers. The work speaks for itself. By the next afternoon, the field is alive again. Engines roar. Fresh Thunderbolts taxi across the patched runway, their olive-drab paint unscarred by battle. Pilots climb into cockpits, mechanics wave them off, and the first formation lifts into the grey Belgian sky barely 48 hours after total destruction. From the perimeter fence, Hauser and his fellow prisoners watch in silence as the new fighters rise into formation overhead. The sound, the deep, steady growl of 18-cylinder radial engines echoes across the countryside. One of the American guards glances over. "Guess we're back in business," he says. Hauser lowers his eyes. The smirk is gone. He understands now what his commanders in Germany refused to admit. The Luftwaffe can destroy aircraft, but it cannot destroy replacement lines. Germany builds airplanes. America builds systems. By January 3rd, Y-34 is fully operational again. 40 aircraft lost, 40 replaced. The Luftwaffe's daring New Year's offensive, meant to cripple the Allies' air power, has achieved nothing but one final lesson for its pilots and prisoners alike. The enemy they mock as industrial fights wars differently, not with valor alone, but with factories, fuel, and logistics that never sleep. The battle for Europe has already been decided, though few yet realize it. January 3rd, 1945:04:00 hours. The sky above Y-34 is still ink black when the first generators hum to life again. Floodlights sweep across the airfield, revealing a landscape transformed. Where 2 days earlier there had been twisted wreckage and frozen craters, now rows of fresh P-47 Thunderbolts gleam under the glare fresh paint, unscuffed propellers, the faint chemical scent of assembly oil mixing with the cold morning air. Private Eddie Morales, the same mechanic who'd shouted the first alarm on New Year's morning, leans against a toolbox, eyes red from exhaustion, but alive with disbelief. Around him, dozens of men move with mechanical precision, torque wrenches clattering, air compressors hissing, oil pumps whining. They've worked without rest for 48 hours, fueled by coffee, canned peaches, and sheer defiance. Sergeant Tom Red Haskins, chief crew chief for the 386th Squadron, claps Morales on the shoulder. 40 gone, he mutters, gesturing to the newly assembled lineup. 40 back. I told you, kid, don't ever bet against the depot. Morales cracks a smile, his face streaked with oil and soot. Yeah, but 40 planes in 2 days? That's America, Haskins interrupts almost reverently. That's what they don't get. Across the field, Captain George Brooking stands with his flight leaders, clipboard in hand. Behind him, engineers inspect the rebuilt runways, filling craters with crushed stone and concrete slabs hauled in from nearby depots. Every hour, trucks arrive carrying more supplies, fuel, ammunition, even replacement uniforms for the men whose gear was burned in the attack. Brooking's voice carries above the rumble of engines. Listen up. The 388th birds are fueled and loaded. We'll fly a combat air patrol at 0800. I want those Krauts to know we're not just back, we're stronger. Someone asks how the replacements arrived so fast. Brooking glances toward the road beyond the perimeter, where convoys still roll in under escort. Those birds came straight from England, crated, flown into Le Havre, and trucked here overnight. You could burn this place to the ground, and they'd rebuild it before breakfast. He says it with a kind of pride, but also quiet awe. He's seen combat in North Africa, Sicily, and France. He's watched friends die, aircraft burn, and towns vanish. But this, the industrial resurrection of an airbase in under 48 hours, is something new, something no army in history has ever done before. At the far edge of the airfield, beyond the chain-link fence, the captured Luftwaffe pilots huddle under guard in a makeshift enclosure. The morning is bitterly cold. Frost rims their breath. Lieutenant Friedrich Hauser and 3 others watch in stunned silence as a replacement P-47 taxis toward the runway. One of them, Unteroffizier Karl Mayer, shakes his head in disbelief. Unmöglich, he mutters. They were all gone. I saw it with my own eyes. Hauser doesn't respond. He simply stares at the giant fighter, its engine idling, propeller a silver blur. A guard walks by with a thermos of coffee, offering a casual greeting. Morning, boys, he says, almost cheerfully. You'll want to keep your heads down when they take off. The Germans exchange glances. There's no malice in the guard's tone, just quiet confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing the outcome of the war is no longer in question. When the first thunderbolts lift off, the air vibrates with raw power. 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney engines thunder to life, sending tremors through the ground. The Germans flinch instinctively, memories of strafing runs and air raids flashing through their minds. Hauser watches the formation climb into the pale morning sky, 12 aircraft in perfect V formation, sunlight flashing off their wings. Done. Meyer looks at him. What do you mean, built? Ibu, Hauser replies. From nothing, from crates and trucks. My father worked in Stuttgart. He built Daimler engines for the 109. It took weeks to get one to the front, and half of the S. That afternoon, Allied intelligence officers begin interrogating the captured pilots. The questioning is formal, methodical names, units, objectives. But the Americans are just as curious about what the Germans think as about what they know. Major Arthur Llewellyn, an intelligence officer from the 9th Air Force, sits across from Hauser in a canvas tent warmed by a kerosene heater. The air smells faintly of oil and paper. You hit us hard, Lieutenant, Llewellyn begins. Y-34, Y-29, Ash multiple targets. Was it meant to cripple our fighter groups? Hauser nods slowly. Yes, the order was to destroy your airfields, to buy time for our ground forces in the Ardennes. Llewellyn leans back. And do you think it worked? Hauser hesitates, glancing toward the tent flap where he can still hear the rumble of engines outside. No, he says finally. It was like trying to punch water. You destroy it, and it just fills itself back in. The major scribbles something in his notebook, but doesn't press. The silence that follows says enough. Later that evening, when the prisoners are moved to a transport truck bound for the holding camp at Reims, they pass by the airfield one last time. Floodlights sweep over rows of active Thunderbolts, every one of them armed and fueled, engines idling in the freezing air. Mechanics in coveralls jog between planes, laughing, shouting over the noise. Hauser stares out from the truck's slatted window. He's seen victory parades in Berlin, Luftwaffe rallies in 41, the proud speeches about German engineering and discipline. None of it compares to this, an enemy that treats war like an industrial process. No passion, no glory, just efficiency. He whispers something under his breath. Wir können das nicht schlagen. We can't beat that. The next morning, January 4th, reconnaissance photos arrive at Allied headquarters. Y-34, Y-29, and other bases hit in Operation Bodenplatte are all fully operational again. Every destroyed aircraft has been replaced. The message filters through Allied command and down to the squadrons. The Luftwaffe's final offensive has failed completely. By contrast, German airfields tell a different story. Bodenplatte has cost them 271 aircraft and 213 irreplaceable pilots, the best they had left. Many were shot down by Allied flak or friendly fire. Others ran out of fuel before reaching home. The Luftwaffe's last gasp has bled it dry. Back at Y-34, Captain Brooking receives a report from command, confirming the scale of the German losses. He hands the paper to his adjutant, shaking his head. 270, one down, he murmurs. That's their future, gone in one morning. The adjutant nods. They thought they'd cripple us. Brooking looks toward the flight line, where a dozen brand new Thunderbolts gleam in the pale winter Sunday. They did worse than fail, he says quietly. They proved what we already knew. That evening, as dusk settles over the airfield, Brooking gathers his men by the ready line. He doesn't give a speech. He just points to the lineup of new aircraft. You built this, he tells them. Every one of you. They burned us down, and we came back stronger. Remember that. The men nod, tired but proud. Someone cracks open a tin of coffee. A few laugh softly. The sound feels almost sacred, ordinary life returning after the storm. In the prisoner enclosure nearby, Hauser hears the laughter through the cold night air. He presses his forehead against the wire, watching the Americans walk between their planes. An army of mechanics, he mutters to himself. That's what they are. And for the first time, he feels not hatred, but a grim, hollow admiration, because deep down, he knows what the captured German pilots whisper among themselves that night. No army on earth can fight a nation that replaces its losses faster than you can destroy them. January 5th, 1945 Reims, France. The snow outside the prisoner compound falls in heavy silence, muffling the rumble of Allied convoys on the distant road. Inside a drafty wooden barrack, Lieutenant Friedrich Hauser sits on a crude bunk, rubbing his hands for warmth. Around him, captured Luftwaffe pilots speak in low voices. They're young, many barely out of training, their faces gaunt from exhaustion and defeat. The air smells of wet wool and tobacco. A single bare light bulb swings overhead. Someone reads a French newspaper smuggled in by a guard. The headlines scream, Luftwaffe, offensive crushed. Hauser doesn't need to read it. He's already seen the truth with his own eyes at Y-34. The Luftwaffe's strike Operation Bodenplatte was meant to cripple Allied air power. Instead, it exposed how utterly outmatched Germany had become. In the days that follow, Allied intelligence compiles the numbers. They are devastating. Out of roughly 900 German aircraft launched on New Year's morning, more than a quarter never returned. 271 fighters lost. 213 pilots killed. Many of them veterans, the last of the Luftwaffe's experienced aces, men who had fought since 1940. The Allies, by contrast, lost 134 aircraft across all targeted airfields, most of which, like those at Y-34, were replaced within days. What had been intended as a crippling blow instead became the Luftwaffe's suicide note. At 9th Air Force Headquarters, a group of officers gathers around a large map spread across a wooden table. Cigarette smoke curls toward the ceiling. Red and blue pins mark the German airfields that participated in Bodenplatte, Cologne, Bonn, Paderborn, and scores more. Brigadier General Hoyt Vandenberg, commanding the 9th, studies the map in silence before speaking. They hit hard, he says, tapping the pins with a pencil. But look at the losses. They didn't just attack, they gutted their own fighter arm. An intelligence officer nods grimly. They used up their veterans. The pilots who survived have maybe 50 hours training, barely enough to land, much less fight. Vandenberg exhales smoke through his nose. Then this is it, he says quietly. The Luftwaffe just died trying to prove it was still alive. While generals and intelligence officers pore over reports, life at Y-34 resumes with astonishing speed. Within a week, the airfield looks almost untouched by the disaster. Fresh concrete covers the craters. Rows of new Thunderbolts sit under camouflage nets. The mechanics' laughter returns, punctuated by the clatter of wrenches and the deep rhythmic hum of engines being tested. To a casual observer, the New Year's raid might seem like a minor setback barely worth a footnote, but for the men who lived through it, it becomes something else. A symbol. Proof that America's true weapon isn't the airplane or the bomb, it's the ability to replace both faster than anyone else. Private Eddie Morales writes home that night, his handwriting shaky from fatigue. Ma, they hit us real bad on New Year's. You'd have thought the world ended. Planes burning everywhere, smoke so thick you couldn't breathe. But 2 days later, we were flying again. They say the Germans can't believe it. I couldn't either. He pauses, chewing the end of his pencil. Then he adds a final line. If this is what America can do out here, I don't see how we can lose. He folds the letter, seals it, and drops it in the outgoing mail crate beside the mess tent. Outside, the cold wind carries the smell of oil and snow. Somewhere above, P-47 seconds roar into the clouds, engines echoing like thunder across the French countryside. Meanwhile, the captured Luftwaffe officers begin their transfer east to larger POW camps. The trucks rumble through the battered villages of northern France, past columns of Allied armor heading toward the Rhine. Hauser watches the procession in silence. He's never seen so many vehicles, endless streams of olive-drab trucks, tanks, and jeeps, moving in both directions, an industrial river flowing toward Germany. For every destroyed vehicle, there seems to be another taking its place. For every fallen pilot, a new one stands ready. The scale defies comprehension. His comrade Meyer whispers beside him, "It's like their entire country is a factory." Hauser nods slowly, "And we thought we could bomb them into submission." Back in Germany, the story of Bodenplatte filters through the military channels with a mixture of denial and despair. Goebbels' propaganda ministry calls it a heroic New Year's blow, but within the Luftwaffe itself, the truth spreads faster than the lies. Pilots returning to their shattered airfields find hangars bombed, fuel depots empty, spare parts non-existent. Maintenance crews salvage wrecks for scrap metal. New recruits boys of 17 arrive with barely 30 hours of flight time, their hands shaking as they start up engines built from scavenged components. At Wörl Airfield, Oberleutnant Erich Hübner, one of the few Bodenplatte veterans still alive, writes in his journal, "The Americans lose airplanes and replace them. We lose pilots, and we replace them with children." It is the last entry before he vanishes over the Ruhr a week later. By February 1945, the contrast between the two air forces has become impossible to ignore. At Y-34, pilots sit down to hot meals in heated mess tents, fresh ammunition stacked neatly in wooden crates. Fuel tankers arrive daily. Replacement aircraft roll in from England on a near-constant basis. Across the Rhine, German pilots scrounge for food and fuel, flying only when absolutely necessary. Many missions end before they begin. Engines fail, radios malfunction, or fuel runs dry mid-flight. When they do reach combat altitude, they face swarms of Thunderbolts, Mustangs, and Lightnings patrolling with impunity. For every German fighter that takes off, 10 Allied fighters are already waiting. On January 9th, 1945, the 9th Air Force launches a massive counterstrike, an aerial hammer blow against the same airfields that had attacked them a week earlier. From Y-34, Captain Brooking's squadron leads the first wave. His Thunderbolt's engine roars as he taxis past a line of cheering mechanics, one of them holding a hand-painted sign, "Return to sender." As the squadron lifts off, Brooking glances down at the rebuilt base, a mosaic of effort, pride, and revenge. The radio crackles in his headset. Hell Hawks 1, cleared for climb. He pulls the stick back, and the big fighter rises into a crimson dawn. Below, the airfield shrinks into a patchwork of snow and smoke. Above, the sky is theirs again, completely, irreversibly. By noon, hundreds of thunderbolts sweep over Germany, bomb racks emptying on hangars and rail yards. German anti-aircraft guns bark furiously, but achieve little. The Luftwaffe barely rises to meet them, what remains of it, anyway. In one of the few encounters of the day, Brooking's formation spots 3 Messerschmitt, 109 seconds, climbing desperately from an airfield near Bonn. "Engage," he orders. The fight is over in seconds. The German fighters never stood a chance. Brooking's gun camera captures the moment a 109 bursts into flame, spiraling into a forest below. His wingman, Lieutenant Charlie Webb, exhales over the radio. They're still flying, but it's like shooting ghosts. Brooking doesn't reply. He doesn't feel triumph, only inevitability. That night, the Thunderbolts return to Y-34, engines coughing as they taxi through falling snow. Ground crews swarm the planes before the props even stop spinning. Mechanics refuel, rearm, and patch bullet holes by floodlight. The rhythm of industry continues, unstoppable, unbroken. As Brooking climbs from his cockpit, Sergeant Haskins greets him with a grin. "Welcome back, sir. How's the Luftwaffe looking tonight?" Brooking glances at the dark horizon, like it finally realized the war's over. They share a laugh brief, tired, genuine, the kind of laughter men use to chase away the ghosts of war. In the prisoner camp at Reims, Hauser lies awake on his bunk, listening to the distant drone of aircraft. He doesn't need to look outside to know what they are. Thunderbolts. Hundreds of them, flying east. He whispers quietly, almost to himself, "They will never stop." And he's right. In that moment, without ceremony or declaration, the air war over Europe ends. Not with the fall of a city, not with a treaty, but with an understanding shared by every captured German pilot. The Luftwaffe no longer exists in any meaningful form. What began as a daring New Year's attack has become the funeral of an air force. February 1000, 945 Republic Aviation Factory, Farmingdale, Long Island. 1,000 miles away from the front. War sounds different. Here it's not gunfire or engines or flak bursts, it's machines. The rhythmic punch of hydraulic presses, the whine of drills, the roar of furnaces. In an enormous hangar, glowing with molten light, hundreds of women in bandanas and overalls stand over assembly jigs, riveting the steel skeleton of another P-47 Thunderbolt. Sparks rain down like fiery snow. Each woman moves with clockwork precision, their faces streaked with sweat and metal dust. A foreman checks his clipboard and nods. "Next one's number 15,611, he says. "Send it down the line." The aircraft rolls forward on its cradle, gleaming under the industrial lights. In less than 60 minutes, it'll be a completed war machine, ready for crating and shipment to the docks. By the time it reaches the airfields of Belgium, someone like Captain George Brooking will already have burned through the one that came before it. This is what Lieutenant Hauser saw, but could never truly understand. The real battlefield of the Second World War wasn't in the skies over Europe. It was right here, in the factories, foundries, and rail yards of America. Back in Europe, the results of that industrial war are everywhere. By mid-February, the US 9th Air Force alone fields over 2,000 operational aircraft. Across England and France, the 8th Air Force prepares for round-the-clock bombing raids over the German heartland. In the Pacific, entire island airstrips are paved by Seabees in less than a week. The numbers are impossible to grasp: tons of supplies, hundreds of thousands of men, millions of gallons of fuel. The German High Command has the numbers too. They're written in ink on war diaries and supply ledgers, and they all point to the same horrifying truth. By 1945, the Allied air forces operate with more aircraft in one theater than the entire Luftwaffe has left worldwide. Inside a bunker near Berlin, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring paces before his staff officers. The air smells of tobacco and desperation. Reports litter the table: fuel shortages, pilot casualties, the catastrophic losses from Bodenplatte. He slams his fist against the map. "They replace aircraft in 2 days, he shouts. 2 days. I was told this would cripple them." An aide murmurs something about the Americans' factories. Göring cuts him off. Factories don't fight wars. Men fight wars. But even as he says it, he knows it's a lie. Because for the first time, An air marshal who once commanded the skies of Europe is forced to face a brutal reality. Men can only fight if machines bring them to battle, and Germany has run out of machines. In March 1945, Allied pilots fly deeper into Germany than ever before. The P-47 Thunderbolt, once mocked as clumsy and overweight, now reigns supreme. It escorts bombers by day and pulverizes convoys by dusk, its 8 50 caliber machine guns, shredding everything that moves. When German forces retreat, it's the Thunderbolt they fear most, not tanks or artillery. The Luftwaffe's own soldiers give it a name whispered with dread: Donnerschlag, thunderclap. At Y-34, the Hellhawks of the 365th Fighter Group have evolved from survivors to juggernauts. They don't just fly missions, they erase resistance. In 1 week alone, their reports list 97 locomotives destroyed, 214 trucks and armored vehicles burned, 33 tanks rendered inoperable. Captain Brooking reads the tallies each night with weary pride. His men are no longer rookies or mechanics, they're the living embodiment of America's industrial muscle. Meanwhile, the war that began as a contest of courage has become a study in arithmetic. At Essen, Allied bombers dropped more tonnage in a single night than the Luftwaffe managed to deliver to England during the entire blitz of 1,940. At Ruhr Valley, the last synthetic fuel plants go dark. At Leipzig, German jet bases sit idle, not for lack of aircraft, but for lack of kerosene, fuel, engines, aluminum, rubber, copper. The same invisible front that Hauser glimpsed from behind the wire at Y-34 now collapses entirely. Germany can no longer replace what it loses. The Allies, by contrast, are building so much that logistics becomes its own enemy: too many planes, too many bombs, not enough runways to launch them all. It's a problem of abundance. February 10th, 1945 POW camp, Reims. A Red Cross officer hands Hauser a letter from his mother in Stuttgart. The paper is creased, smudged, smelling faintly of smoke. "We hear the bombing every night," she writes. "The city glows red for hours, but the factories still work in the morning." He stares at the words for a long time. His mother doesn't know that the factories she speaks of are little more than ruins now, their workers struggling to build aircraft from scavenged parts. She doesn't know that the skies over Stuttgart belong entirely to the Americans, that somewhere above her, squadrons of P-47 seconds and Mustangs fly unopposed. Hauser folds the letter and slips it into his coat pocket. Outside, another Allied convoy passes by, endless as always. He no longer bothers to count the trucks. At Y-34, the tempo of operations only increases. With the weather clearing, the 9th Air Force moves into its final phase, cutting off retreating German forces ahead of the Rhine crossings. Every day, pilots fly 3, sometimes 4 sorties. The ground crews, the army of mechanics, keep pace like a machine that never sleeps. Sergeant Haskin's men have turned maintenance into choreography. Engines are swapped in hours, not days. Bullet holes patched with riveted aluminum plates pulled from destroyed wings. Oil and hydraulic fluid recycled from shot-down aircraft. Private Morales times himself refueling a Thunderbolt 8 minutes flat. He wipes his hands and grins. "Faster than a pit stop at Indy," he says. Haskins just laughs. "Kid, the war's the racetrack." It's true. The front moves faster than anyone can keep track. Within weeks, the Allies are crossing the Rhine, and Germany's once mighty airfields lie in ruins behind them. In April 1945, a captured Luftwaffe general gives a final statement to Allied interrogators. "We laughed at your Thunderbolts in 43. We called them fat pigs. Then we learned what they really were. Machines built by an empire of machines. You fought us with factories. You fought us with time itself. We were finished the day your first convoy left New York." When his words are translated to English, they are passed around among intelligence officers. One underlines the phrase "empire of machines" in red pencil. It will later appear in a post-war analysis, one that concludes, coldly and without emotion, the Luftwaffe was defeated not by air combat, but by production rate. Back home in Farmingdale, the 15,683rd and final P-47 rolls off the line. Workers gather to watch as the massive fighter is towed out of the hangar. Its nose bears a stenciled name, Hell's Invoice. One of the four women, a riveter named Eleanor Price, wipes her hands on her coveralls. So that's it, she says. Her supervisor smiles. That's the last one. The boys over there won't need many more. They don't, because at that same moment, across a collapsing Germany, Allied fighters roam uncontested from horizon to horizon. Cities burn, railways shatter, resistance evaporates. May 7th, 1945 Reims, France. Hauser sits in the same compound where he once watched thunderbolts take flight. A guard steps in, breathless, smiling. It's over, he says. Germany's surrendered. Hauser doesn't react at first. He just stares at the ground. After a long silence, he looks up. How long, he asks softly, did it take you to win? The guard shrugs. Depends who you ask, but we replaced everything they ever destroyed. Hauser nods once, slowly. He understands. The war that had begun with speed, with blitzkrieg, with precision, ended with production. The Reich had tried to fight time. The Allies built a clock that never stopped ticking. That night, thunder echoes again over Y-34, but it isn't war, it's weather. The sky is alive with rain, hammering on the hangars that once burned. Mechanics huddle in tents. Pilots sleep in their bunks. And somewhere out in the dark, a lone P-47 sits under a tarp, silent at last. Its name, painted in fading white letters, still reads Hellhawks. A storm rolls over the field, and lightning flashes against its metal skin, a final echo of the sound that once terrified a continent. The war in Europe is over, but the lesson it left behind will define every war that comes after. Bravery wins battles. Industry wins wars.